Have you ever wondered why some souls seem to live closer to Jesus? Not louder, not more visible, but deeper? Have you ever felt that Jesus was gently calling you inward, while part of you resisted, afraid of what that depth might require? And have you ever sensed that many remain at the surface of faith, not because Jesus does not call them, but because they do not answer? There is a quiet truth revealed through the life and writings of Saint Faustina Kowalska. Jesus does not force intimacy, he invites it, and not all souls respond in the same way. Saint Faustina once said, "Jesus calls every soul to love, but only some allow him to lead them into the depths where love costs something." Subscribe if you wish to walk this deeper path of mercy and interior transformation. Saint Faustina teaches that Jesus desires closeness with every soul, yet he respects freedom so completely that he never drags the heart beyond what it is willing to surrender. Most souls remain at the surface, not because they are rejected, but because depth requires trust and trust requires surrender. To go deeper with Jesus is not about doing more externally. It is about allowing him to touch places within you that you normally protect. Your fears, your wounds, your hidden attachments, your need for control. Depth begins where comfort ends. In her diary, Faustina writes that Jesus often complained not of great sins but of coldness, distraction, and half-given hearts. These are not dramatic rejections, they are polite distances. The soul prays, believes, follows, but keeps Jesus at arm's length. Surface faith looks peaceful, but it avoids interior confrontation. Deep faith feels unsettling at first because it exposes truth. Imagine the sea. At the surface, the water is warm, bright, and predictable. Waves move gently, light reflects easily, but beneath the surface there is silence, pressure, mystery, and life unseen. Jesus calls souls not to abandon the surface, but to descend, to let him guide them into interior depths where transformation happens. Saint Faustina understood this call personally. Jesus did not ask her to become extraordinary in the eyes of the world. He asked her to become transparent before him. He asked for honesty, obedience, trust, and availability. And many times she trembled before that call. Depth costs something. It costs illusions, it costs control, it costs superficial peace, but it gives something far greater, intimacy with the heart of Jesus. Most souls prefer a faith that comforts without transforming. They want grace without surrender, mercy without conversion, love without vulnerability. But Jesus gently calls some souls further, not because they are better, but because they are willing to listen in silence, willing to obey even when it is difficult, willing to trust when they do not understand, willing to let mercy reshape them from the inside out. If you feel unsettled by this call, it may be because Jesus is inviting you deeper, not away from others, not above others, but inward, where love becomes real. The call to go deeper with Jesus rarely begins with something dramatic. Saint Faustina Kowalska reveals that it usually starts as a gentle interior disturbance, a sense that surface faith is no longer enough. The prayers you once prayed easily now feel insufficient. The routine you once followed faithfully now feels shallow. Something within you longs for more, even if you cannot yet name what that more is. This is often the first sign that Jesus is calling a soul deeper. Depth begins when comfort no longer satisfies. Jesus told Faustina that many souls love him only as far as it costs them nothing. They pray when it is easy. They trust when life is calm. They surrender when they remain in control. But when Jesus asks for a deeper interior yes, one that touches fear, habits, attachments, and self-will, the soul hesitates, not because it does not love him, but because it is afraid of what deeper love will demand. Saint Faustina writes that Jesus desires souls who will allow him to reign not only in their actions, but in their interior life, their thoughts, intentions, desires, and hidden resistances. This is where most souls stop. They give Jesus their behavior, but not their inner world. Surface faith says, "I believe in you." Depth says, "I trust you with everything I am." To go deeper means allowing Jesus to expose what is hidden, not to condemn it, but to heal it. It means letting him touch areas you avoid. Resentment you excuse, fears you manage alone, wounds you hide even in prayer, attachments you justify, and patterns you refuse to surrender. Faustina herself struggled with this call. She often felt unworthy, weak, and overwhelmed by what Jesus asked of her interiorly. She wrote of moments when she wanted to remain simple, unnoticed, and safe. Yet Jesus continued inviting her inward, not toward suffering for its own sake, but toward union. Depth is not about doing harder things. It is about becoming more honest. Many souls remain at the surface because surface faith allows them to feel religious without being transformed. They pray, but do not listen. They receive grace, but do not respond. They speak of God, but do not allow Him to rearrange their interior life. Jesus does not accuse these souls. He waits, and He continues calling quietly. The call deeper often sounds like this: trust me here. Let go of this. Stop controlling. Bring this fear to me. Do not hide from me. These invitations feel uncomfortable because they threaten the false sense of peace the surface provides. But Jesus does not call souls deeper to disturb them. He calls them deeper to free them. The soul that accepts this invitation begins to experience a different kind of faith. Prayer becomes more silent, more listening, more interior. The soul starts to notice resistance, and instead of defending it, offers it to Jesus. Mercy becomes not just something received, but something that reshapes the heart. Depth does not make life easier. It makes love truer. And this is why Jesus calls some souls deeper, not because He favors them, but because they are willing to be changed. As the soul begins to respond to Jesus' quiet invitation, something important becomes clear. Going deeper is not about intensity, but about availability. Saint Faustina Kowalska learned that Jesus does not search for souls capable of extraordinary endurance. He searches for souls willing to remain open when the interior cost increases. Most souls do not reject Jesus. They simply stop listening when His voice leads them beyond comfort. Depth begins when the soul realizes that Jesus' call is not always accompanied by consolation. At the surface, faith often feels reassuring. There are clear routines, familiar prayers, visible structures. But when Jesus invites a soul deeper, He begins to speak in subtler ways. Through silence, through interior movements, through small obediences that feel costly because they touch pride, fear, or control. Faustina writes that Jesus sometimes withdraws sensible comfort, not as punishment but as invitation. He wants the soul to love Him not for what it feels, but for who He is. This is where many souls pause. They mistake the absence of feeling for distance, when in truth it is proximity of a different kind. Surface faith depends on reassurance. Deeper faith learns to remain without it. To go deeper means accepting that Jesus may not explain Himself. He may not clarify every request. He may not remove uncertainty immediately. Instead, He asks the soul to stay, attentive, receptive, obedient, even when the path is unclear. This is not easy. Faustina herself recorded moments of deep interior tension. She wanted to understand, to feel secure, to be certain she was pleasing God. Yet Jesus repeatedly invited her to trust His heart more than her understanding. He asked her to let go of the need to interpret everything and simply remain available. Availability is the true measure of depth. A soul goes deeper when it says, "I do not understand, but I stay. I feel weak, but I listen. I am afraid, but I do not withdraw." Many souls remain at the surface because they equate faith with clarity. When clarity fades, they retreat. But Jesus calls some souls beyond clarity, into relationship. Relationship requires trust without constant explanation. Imagine standing at the edge of deep water. At the surface, your feet touch the ground. You feel stable. But deeper water requires surrender. You must trust the water to hold you. You must release control. You must stop standing and begin to float. This is what Jesus asks of deeper souls. Not to abandon reason, but to release control. Not to seek suffering, but to accept vulnerability. Not to become dramatic, but to become transparent. Faustina understood that Jesus does not reveal depth all at once. He leads gradually, one interior surrender at a time. He waits for consent. And if the soul resists, He does not force. He simply remains near, calling again in quiet ways. Depth is not about perfection. It is about staying open when the soul wants to close, and this is why most remain at the surface. It feels safer to stand than to float. But those who allow Jesus to carry them discover something the surface cannot offer, a peace that does not depend on circumstances, and a union that grows in silence. As the soul allows Jesus to lead it deeper, another interior shift begins to unfold, the purification of intention. Saint Faustina Kowalska reveals that depth is not only about surrendering control, but about allowing Jesus to purify why we do what we do. Many souls remain at the surface because they serve God while still protecting their own motivations. At the surface, the soul asks, "Am I doing the right thing?" In depth, the soul asks, "Am I doing this for love?" Jesus told Faustina that he desires souls who act not for consolation, recognition, or reassurance, but out of pure love and obedience. This is where the call deepens, because purity of intention removes every hidden support the ego relies on. At the surface, good actions are often accompanied by subtle expectations: to feel peace, to feel holy, to feel useful, to feel affirmed, to feel seen. But Jesus gently invites deeper souls to let go even of these. He asks them to act when no one notices, to pray when prayer feels dry, to obey when obedience feels small and unremarkable. This is not spiritual severity, it is spiritual freedom. Faustina experienced this intensely. There were moments when Jesus asked her to perform simple, hidden acts that brought no immediate consolation. She wrote that these moments revealed the true state of her heart. Was she acting for him, or for how acting made her feel? Depth exposes intention. This is why many souls remain at the surface. They love God sincerely, but they are not yet ready to let go of interior rewards. They serve, but they still measure. They obey, but they still negotiate. They surrender, but only when it feels safe. Jesus does not condemn this. He invites beyond it. To go deeper means allowing Jesus to strip away the need to feel successful in your spirituality. It means loving him when love feels quiet. It means trusting him when nothing inside you confirms that trust. It means continuing to choose him when there is no emotional feedback. This kind of depth feels uncomfortable at first because it removes spiritual supports the soul has leaned on, but it replaces them with something stronger: union. Union does not depend on feeling, it depends on fidelity. Faustina learned that when intention becomes pure, the soul stops asking, "How am I doing?" and begins resting in, "I am with him." This is a deeper peace, one that does not rise and fall with emotion or success. Imagine a soul walking through a quiet chapel after Compline. The lights are dim, no one is present. The soul kneels, not because it feels drawn, but because it loves. No one sees. Nothing stirs emotionally. Yet Jesus sees everything. This is depth. It is love that remains when everything else is stripped away, and it is precisely here, in these hidden, unmeasured moments, that Jesus draws closest. Not because the soul is strong, but because it is honest. Not because it is extraordinary, but because it is willing. As intention is purified, the soul begins to experience mercy in a new and deeper way. Saint Faustina Kowalska reveals that at the surface, mercy is often understood as something we receive when we fail. But in depth, mercy becomes something the soul lives from, a constant interior posture that reshapes how it relates to God, to itself, and to others. Jesus told Faustina that many souls approach his mercy only when they feel unworthy or afraid. They come to him after mistakes, seeking reassurance, forgiveness, relief. This is good and necessary, but he desires to lead some souls beyond this, into a state where mercy is no longer an occasional refuge, but a daily atmosphere. Depth changes the way the soul understands mercy. At the surface, the soul says, "I go to God when I fall." In depth, the soul says, "I live entirely because he carries me." And Faustina learned that Jesus calls deeper souls to remain constantly aware of their dependence on his mercy, not with anxiety, but with peace. This awareness keeps the heart humble, flexible, and open. It removes the illusion of self-sufficiency and replaces it with trust. Many souls remain at the surface because they still relate to God through self-assessment. Am I doing well? Am I failing? Am I worthy today? Am I distant or close? But deeper souls learn to abandon this constant measuring. They rest instead in the certainty that everything, strength, weakness, desire, failure, effort, is held within mercy. This frees the soul from fear and makes it attentive rather than anxious. Faustina writes that Jesus desires souls who trust his mercy more than their own judgment. This is difficult because it requires letting go of the need to understand yourself completely. It requires believing that God's gaze is more truthful and more loving than your self-analysis. Depth teaches the soul to say, even now he loves me. Even here he sustains me. Even in this weakness his mercy is active. This trust changes everything. When the soul lives from mercy, prayer becomes simpler. The soul no longer tries to impress God or explain itself endlessly. It comes as it is. Silence becomes easier. Confession becomes lighter. Gratitude becomes more natural. Relationships change as well. A soul formed by mercy becomes merciful. It stops demanding perfection from others because it no longer demands it from itself. It becomes patient, gentle, and understanding, not by effort, but by overflow. This is why Jesus draws some souls deeper. He wants them to become living witnesses of mercy, not through words but through presence, through calm, through gentleness, through trust. Faustina understood that depth is not about spiritual intensity, but about surrendered trust. The deeper the soul goes, the less it relies on itself and the more it rests in Jesus' heart. Many souls fear this depth because it feels like losing control. But in reality, it is the discovery of safety. To live from mercy is to stop defending yourself before God and allow Him to be everything. When a soul finally accepts Jesus' call to go deeper, something unexpected happens. The journey does not become heavier, it becomes lighter. Saint Faustina Kowalska discovered that depth is not an added burden placed on the soul, but the removal of what never belonged there in the first place. Control loosens, fear softens, the need to manage one's spiritual life fades, and in its place, a quiet joy begins to grow. This joy is not emotional excitement, it is interior freedom. Jesus told Faustina that souls who remain at the surface often feel exhausted in their faith without understanding why. They try harder, pray more, analyze themselves constantly, yet remain restless. Depth changes this because it shifts the center of gravity from the self to God. At the surface, the soul carries itself. In depth, the soul is carried. This is the great reversal. Faustina learned that once the soul stops resisting interior surrender, life becomes simpler. Not because problems disappear, but because the soul no longer faces them alone. Trust replaces tension. Silence replaces noise. Mercy replaces self-judgment. Depth does not mean fewer struggles, it means fewer defenses. A deeper soul no longer asks, "Am I enough?" It rests in, "He is enough." This is why Jesus continues calling some souls deeper, not because they are stronger, more faithful, or more deserving, but because they are willing to stop standing on the surface and allow themselves to be held. They allow Jesus to lead. They allow mercy to define them. They allow love to rearrange their interior life. Faustina wrote that Jesus delights in souls who trust Him blindly, not because they are unaware, but because they are surrendered. This trust does not make the soul passive. It makes it attentive, sensitive, responsive, alive. Depth brings a new way of seeing everything. Suffering is no longer a threat. It becomes a place of encounter. Weakness is no longer shameful. It becomes an opening. Silence is no longer empty. It becomes full. Obedience is no longer heavy. It becomes restful. The soul realizes that depth is not about intensity, effort, or perfection. It is about belonging. Belonging to Jesus without conditions. Belonging even when nothing is felt. Belonging even when understanding fails. This is why most souls remain at the surface, not because they are rejected, but because depth requires trust without guarantees. And yet Jesus never stops calling. He waits patiently. He invites gently. He respects freedom completely. If you feel drawn by this message, it is not accidental. It may be because Jesus is whispering to your heart, not demanding, not forcing, but inviting you inward, not to do more, but to surrender more, not to climb higher, but to rest deeper. Depth is not reserved for the extraordinary. It is offered to the willing. And Saint Faustina would remind you of this truth with quiet confidence. Jesus does not call souls deeper to overwhelm them. He calls them deeper to love them more. The choice is never rushed. The invitation never expires. The heart of Jesus remains open, waiting.